Welcome to A Course in Miracles, where you'll discover health and well-being through inner peace. Your host is Eloisa Ramos, EFT master and author of Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. Using EFT, the Ramos clearing technique, and the principles of A Course in Miracles, you'll learn how to open your mind to healing and to all that is inherently yours: deep fulfillment, vitality, joy, and inner peace.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Eloisa Ramos. Today we explore questions of identity and creation. Are we the authors of reality and life? And do we create ourselves? We are continuing with the study of the last three sections of Chapter 3 of A Course in Miracles text, and we'll start with an example to review the ideas of making versus creating, to understand the difference between the self-image and the true self. My brother called me the other day and gave me a lead on a house because my 25-year-old son has been saving money and wanting to buy a house. But since the housing prices have been on the rise, he hasn't found one he can afford. I told my son about the lead, but when I looked up the information for the property, I found the price to be out of reach for my son's budget, and it already had a pending sale on it anyway. So I texted my son back with the price and said it was too high. But I wanted to acknowledge that life is full of possibilities. So I wrote, quote, "We will keep looking. There's something always there for you," unquote. After I wrote this, I wanted to make sure he believed this for himself too. So I asked him if that was true for him. Once I asked him, it occurred to me to double check myself and see if this was completely true for me. So I used self-muscle testing and asked, is there always something there, meaning in the housing market, for my son? But I got a no. This answer was in conflict with what I thought I believed and had said to my son in wanting to assure him that he would find something. Having found a contradiction, I started to use the Ramos clearing technique to clear the conflict. I tuned into what was giving me the no answer and found it was a judgment that said, because there is a shortage of houses in my son's price range, it means he will be excluded from being able to buy a house. This perception of limitation was coming from my past memories of the last housing market. The past memory I tuned into was justifying the reality of limitation and exclusion for my son, and it was based on perceiving the past memory as evidence that reflected truth. However, I already knew that in truth there is no limitation nor exclusion. And that's why I offered the thought that said, there will always be something for you. The problem I discovered when I used the self-muscle testing was that when I first asked, is limitation and exclusion real? I got a yes. But when I asked, is limitation and exclusion true? I got a no. This may seem strange. Can something be real but not true? Yes, this often happens. Let me explain how the idea of limitation and exclusion had reality for me, even though my mind could perceive that those ideas were false. Since my mind knew that the thought, there is always something for everyone, reflects spiritual, unlimited truth, this thought was true in my mind. It was a thought that included everyone without exception. Because of this knowledge, the thought of limitation and exclusion had to be false. False thoughts contradict true thoughts because they deny spiritual truth and stand for limitation and exclusion. The conflict arose because even though the thought of limitation and exclusion was false, it still had reality in it for me, but only in my mind alone. Why did it have reality in my mind alone? This was the case because the thought of limitation and exclusion was held as part of a personal past memory, which I judged to be real evidence, and therefore real, and used it to believe that was a reflection or an expression of reality. In this case, reality would not be reflecting the infinite, unlimited truth, but rather it would be reflecting what is contrary to that, namely limitation and exclusion. And so limitation and exclusion were real to me, though they were false thoughts. So, the question that comes up is, why would I want to hold on to past memories that misjudge reality and make false thoughts of limitation appear real? Page 47 says, quote, "The strain of constant judgment is virtually intolerable. It is curious that an ability so debilitating would be so deeply cherished. Yet, if you wish to be the author of reality, you will insist on holding on to judgment." Unquote. We hold on to the past because it is evidence in our mind for believing that our past judgments reflect truth and are real, even though they are false thoughts. We want to be the authors of reality, believing that our judgments have the power to make reality into what we judge it to be and wish it to be, and not the reflection of truth that reality is. We use the past as evidence to deny spiritual truth and see instead reality how we want to see it and how we want to believe that it is. In other words, I want the world, which I call reality because that's what's real to me, to be as I wish it to be, not as it is in truth. Yet in this case, I knew that in truth, limitation and exclusion are not God's will. However, holding on to the contradicting thoughts makes an impression in our mind that there is a conflict between our wishes or will and God's. This is not the case at all, but it can appear that way, and it indicates that my will is separate from the will of God. In this example, I was holding two contradictory thoughts or points of view about the same event. One thought was true because it reflected unlimited power and possibility, which is the truth of God, Spirit, and creation. The other thought, though it had reality in my mind, was still false because it denied truth and embraced limitation and exclusion. These are contradictory thoughts. If I believe one is true, the other will have to be false. However, if I believe both of them, then they both will become real to me, but not at the same time, since that would leave two contradicting realities in my mind. This is why we split our mind. My mind can only perceive one reality at a time. It can switch back and forth between contradictory realities, but it cannot hold both. The power of our belief can give reality to contradictory thoughts, but it cannot make them both be true. The false thoughts remain false even when we believe them to be true, and so make them real to us. They become only real and true to us alone, and not universally true, and they will not have reality to others. This is an important point to keep in mind. While a false thought can be believed and given reality in our mind, our belief does not have the power to make it real in truth. This is because it is false to begin with, for the reason that it denies spiritual truth. Let me give you an example to illustrate this. Santa Claus is a false thought. In other words, it is a made-up story or a lie. What we call Santa Claus is not a true creation, since Santa Claus is not alive. I do understand there was a Saint Nicholas. However, he did not go down the chimney, and he did not bring presents for kids on a sled pulled by reindeer that fly through the sky. When children give their belief to this story, Santa Claus becomes quite real in their mind, reindeer and all. But it is only real to them. In addition, no matter how much a child believes in Santa Claus, their belief cannot create a real Santa Claus. That is why adults end up dressing up like Santa Claus, to keep hiding the truth that there is no real Santa Claus, and that it is a false thought or made-up story. The point is that no matter how much we believe in and how intensely real a false thought is in our mind does not have the power to make the false thought true in truth, in universal reality. A true creation has reality in truth for all. False thoughts have reality in our mind, but only in our mind alone. They are like Santa Claus, made up stories, not created. Page 49 of A Course in Miracles text says, quote, every system of thought must have a starting point. It begins with either a making or a creating. A difference we have already discussed. Their resemblance lies in their power as foundations. Their difference lies in what rests upon them. Both are cornerstones for systems of belief by which one lives. Unquote. God cannot create false thoughts. We alone make them up. We alone made the fearful ego thought system of separation that denies spiritual truth. God, being only truth, cannot create unlike himself. Our true thoughts are our link to knowledge or spiritual truth, and A Course in Miracles calls them the voice for God or Holy Spirit. They are creative. The false thoughts are the voice of ego, and they do not create, but only make illusion. They are based on the authority of our past memories, learning, and judgments, which are all perception-based, not knowledge-based. Knowledge creates, perception makes. The memories of our past represent only our personal and selective point of view, though we want to believe they represent truth and are universal. They are false thoughts because they are not absolute nor certain like knowledge is. The question arises then, why in the world would we ever want to believe in the false thoughts of ego? Well, if you ask a child whether believing in Santa Claus is a good idea or not, what do you think they will say? They're going to tell you it's a good idea, of course, because Santa Claus brings presents and toys. A Course in Miracles says we will automatically believe in what we value. So what does the ego thought system have to offer us of value? If you recall in our previous program on inequality, we quoted from page 42 where it says, quote, the ego is a wrong-minded attempt to perceive yourself as you wish to be rather than as you are, unquote. This wish to be as we perceive ourselves to be rather than as we are turns out to have major value for most of us. In addition, it is why we believe we are self-created and forms what A Course in Miracles calls the authority problem. Furthermore, it is the belief that forms the cornerstone for each of the two thought systems in our mind. Page 48 says, quote, the issue of authority is really a question of authorship. When you have an authority problem, it is always because you believe you are the author of yourself and project your delusion onto others. You then perceive the situation as one in which others are literally fighting you for your authorship. This is the fundamental error of all those who believe they have usurped the power of God." Unquote. Suppose that each of us is self-created, that we usurped the power of God and made ourself the author of itself. So, when we look out and see different forms of life, each would be self-created. There would not be one source for all of life or creation. Each separate life form would be a mini-God unto itself. What would happen then? Each mini-God would then perceive threat from the other mini-gods, since how can the title of God, which means supreme authority, be established without question when there are others claiming the same title? The mini-gods would have to go to battle in order to protect their title. Fighting would be necessary, since how could each continue to believe they are God as long as another claims to be more powerful, knowledgeable, or have more territory? The establishment as to who is the supreme authority could never happen when there is more than one mini-God. So in effect, there would be no God. If there is separation, who or what is God could never be established. If there is no separation, then there would only be one God that creates all of life and is self-creating. So the fundamental question for us to decide is whether we want to believe we are the created children of the life we call God, or whether we are self-created mini-gods. And these two beliefs form the cornerstones for each of the two thought systems that we listen to and use to take direction and guidance from. When we say we create life, most of us understand we don't create others, since they have a life of their own. Sometimes that can get confusing for some people, but most of us know that what we are talking about is our experiences of life when we say we create our life. And that is not the same as life itself. Because we perceive ourselves to be an ego body, what we often call life is the physical and emotional experiences we have in our physical experience as a body. This is not what God creates, since it is made by perception. So that is not creative life. The world we experience is all perception based. That is why we can shift and change how we feel and experience life, since perception is subject to interpretation, which can be changed, unlike truth. It is also why the world changes when our thinking changes. There's nothing constant or eternal about the world, because there's nothing constant or eternal about our perception. On the other hand, absolute truth, spirit, and creative power has already been created. We use that creative power to think and believe in thoughts that are both true and false. The thinking gives rise to our perception. However, it is not knowledge. Our mind can perceive in many ways and believe in anything, but the essential creative nature of life is not affected by belief nor perception, precisely because that nature is knowledge and beyond perception. It's the spiritual realm or dimension or level. Only correct perception, which comes from true thoughts, can open our mind to the knowledge of our true self or higher self or Christ self, Christ mind. Page 44 says, quote, "You keep asking what it is you are. This implies that the answer is not only one you know, but it is also one that it is up to you to supply. Yet you cannot perceive yourself correctly. You have no image to be perceived." The word image is always perception related and not a part of knowledge. Images are symbolic and stand for something else. The idea of changing your image recognizes the power of perception, but also implies that there is nothing stable to know. Knowing is not open to interpretation, unquote. Making or changing the self-image of ourself, others, and God is not creating. Making ourselves into what we wish to be or into what we wish others to be, or even into what we want God to be or what we believe God is, does not change the essence of our created nature, which we can only share with Spirit or God. When we see ourselves as an image, it will be impermanent and unstable precisely because it is perception-based. It is our judgment and thinking that is defining and so making up the self-image as we wish it to be. If we are the one making up the image of ourself, how can we be the image itself? That would be like saying the artist that draws a self-portrait is the drawing itself. The drawing is a representation or a symbol for the artist, but it is not the artist himself. All self-images are made, not created from knowledge. The true created self has no image to be perceived, since it is spirit and part of knowledge. Changing our image implies changing our perception, how we think and see ourselves, but this has no effect on our true self. Our true self is constant and never changing, precisely because it is not perception-based. To know our true self, we first have to correctly perceive what we are, and this requires the practice of forgiveness. This is so because forgiveness is the choice to love and release the separation, which we perceive as real when we hold on to our judgments and grievances. Separation is a false thought, and we need to practice forgiveness to let its reality go. As we release the perceived reality of separation from our mind, we open to receiving the truth that separation never occurred and we never usurped the power of God. Page 48 says, quote, "You have not usurped the power of God, but you have lost it. Fortunately, to lose something does not mean that it has gone. It merely means that you do not remember where it is. Its existence does not depend on your ability to identify it or even to place it. It is possible to look on reality without judgment and merely know that it is there. Peace is a natural heritage of spirit. Everyone is free to refuse to accept this inheritance, but he is not free to establish what his inheritance is." Unquote. What we are is spirit and has been created in truth without lack nor separation. We can believe the ego thought system, which says otherwise, and make images of ourselves, but this does not change the truth of our creation. We think that our creative power is in self-creation, but that is only an illusion. Our true creative power remains with God, and we share in this power because we are His creations. But when we choose to believe we can be self-created, we lose this power and make illusions that have reality in our mind alone, not in truth. Naturally, we are free to refuse to accept our inheritance as children of God because self-creation seems to offer us more value. But this choice does not take away our inheritance. Peace is our inheritance as the children of the Creator. It belongs to us because of what we are in truth. We can refuse to accept it and choose the grievance, which leads to conflict and fear, but we cannot establish that peace is not our inheritance. What God has given to His creation remains unchanged. It is precisely because we are not self-created that truth and spirit cannot be changed. This is our salvation. It guarantees that sooner or later we will wake up and know the truth of what we are, whole, perfect, without lack, and remaining forever in peace and oneness. And with this, we conclude our program for today on identity and creation. Until next time, blessings to everyone.
For more information about EFT, muscle testing, working with Eloisa, and to download a free version of the Ramos Clearing Technique, visit www.healingwitheft.com.